Welcome to Bedhampton Church. Contact us at www.bedhampton.church. But for now, let's continue that journey with this input.
Last week we had Messy Church, so we didn't actually have a sermon here on our Lent series. But if you were at St Thomas last week, you would have heard Max talking about silence as solitude. And he encouraged us to practice being silent. I don't know how many of you, if you weren't at St Thomas last week, have taken the time this week to go onto the website or go onto Facebook and listen to Max's sermon. If you clicked on at the wrong point of the service, you might have thought all sound had gone. Because at the end of Max's sermon, he finished with 5 minutes of silence. And he put his timer on. And he just got everybody to practice being silent. I wonder how many of you struggle with silence. That if there's silence, you want to fill it with something. That your mind starts to wander. And I wonder how many of you have taken up the challenge that Max gave us to practice silence as solitude. Throughout the Gospels, we have many examples of Jesus taking himself off to a quiet place to pray and just to be with his Father. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he leaves the disciples and he goes off and he says to the disciples, just wait here, I'm going off to pray. And he comes back and he finds the disciples asleep. He said, couldn't you even just wait? Couldn't you even just be silent and wait? No, the disciples couldn't do it. And he went off and came back a second time, and guess what? They were asleep. And does that happen to you if you get a minute to be silent? If you don't fill it with something else, do you fall asleep? I certainly know I do. And this week, our theme is Sabbath. But before I go any further, I just want to ask you a question. What does Sabbath mean to you? So turn round to the person you're sitting near and just have a conversation. What does Sabbath mean? Okay, I'm now going to ask you to give me some feedback, and I'm going to write down some things that you're using because you're now writing my sermon for me, okay? So I will need to use those later. So, any ideas on what Sabbath means to you? A day of rest. Roger, did you think it was a day of rest?
Well, by the time I've looked all this kit here and packed it all up and chosen the songs and loaded them on my iPad and set all this up here and then sung the songs and then heaved it all home again, my Sabbath doesn't start till just after lunch. But that's...
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it's wonderful to do it, so I don't know, does that work?
A different day each week.
A different day each week.
I think it's a statement of what we believe is the most important day of the week, and that we state to the whole world what we believe.
Okay. Linda, you said a different day each week. Why for you is it different day each week?
Because I work shift.
Because you work shifts. Yeah. Okay, a statement of what we believe. Any other ideas? Sabbath.
Time for reflection.
Time for reflection.
Day without an agenda.
Ooh, a day without an agenda.
Well, for me, the Sabbath is a day where you should devote the thoughts of God and try to just have family activity and no work. But unfortunately, I find in my life at the moment that that's completely impossible. So I know what I want it to be.
Yeah.
Actually, the reality is not. It's not what I want it to be.
25 years ago, it used to be me and Susie having a lie-in and listening to Daily Travis on the radio.
And then something changed 25 years ago. 25 years ago this week, something changed, didn't it, Max?
Yeah, I was going to say the Sabbath to me is a gift from God. It's not rules and regulations. It doesn't have to be necessarily
Rest from our usual activities. Any other thoughts?
It's a time to spend worshipping God.
Time to spend worshipping God. Wow. Family time. Wow, Max, what a difference from Congregation 1. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you for that. I will come back to some of those thoughts. Before I even knew I was going to be preaching today, I've been doing some reading about Sabbath, which I thought was quite a challenge for me because I do live my life at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and God was challenging me to actually think more, to slow down, and to think about Sabbath. So I started reading Sabbath by Wayne Muller, and then I was recommended a book called Sabbath as Resistance by Walter Brueggemann, which is absolutely fantastic. So obviously when Max then said, right, for Lent reading this year, we're going to be looking at John Mark Comer, The Elimination of Hurry. Of course, I bought that as well and read it. And challenged really by what I've been reading in John Mark Comer and Walter Brueggemann and Wayne Muller. And I will draw some of those things into what I'm saying today. Earlier in the service, Neville read our two readings for us, and our first reading came from the book of Exodus. I was also smiling to myself when I chose this reading because I'm in the middle of doing an assignment on the Decalogue. The Decalogue is the 10 Commandments. And so I did smile when I had Sabbath. I thought, oh, I know the passage I can choose. And it's one I've been looking at quite a lot recently. So, Exodus 20, we have the first iteration of the 10 Commandments in the Pentateuch. And the Pentateuch is the first 5 books of the Bible. And you know that when I'm talking to you, I always like to put things in context. So I was thinking about where does this passage today sit in relation to what's gone before. So I'm going to do, I say a 30-second walkthrough. It might be a bit more than 30 seconds, but a quick walkthrough where we've got to. If you open your Bible, we start at the book of Genesis, the book of beginnings. And in the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. And he took 6 days to create. And on the 7th day, he rested. He made woman and man, Adam and Eve. They disobeyed him and they were banished from the Garden of Eden. Then as we go through the rest of the book of Genesis, we read about God's people, but particularly it focuses on 3 characters, Abraham, Jacob and Joseph, who we know as the patriarchs. Jacob had 12 sons. Joseph was his special son, his favourite son, who ends up being sold into slavery and ends up in Egypt. In Egypt, he's thrown into prison. And it's when he's in prison, he interprets dreams, and he ends up, the cupbearer to Pharaoh interprets his dream, and several years later, the cupbearer remembers, oh, I know, Pharaoh, you've got a dream. I know a guy I met in prison who could interpret dreams. So Joseph is hauled out of prison before Pharaoh, interprets the dreams. He becomes Pharaoh's second in command. And then his whole family come to live with him in Egypt. That family multiply, they thrive. The Egyptians don't like this, they take them into slavery. And that takes us through to the beginning of the book of Exodus. At Exodus, the Israelites are oppressed in Egypt, and then Exodus quickly focuses on one man, Moses. Now, Moses was born in adverse circumstances at a time when Pharaoh had issued a decree that every child should be born should be killed. Moses was saved, first of all, by his mother hiding him. Then his sister placed him in a basket in the River Nile. And then Pharaoh's daughter found him in that basket and drew him out of the Nile and took him and brought him up as her own son. Interesting, Moses was saved by 3 different women. And Moses grew up in the royal palace, and later he's called by God, and more significantly, God reveals his name to Moses. I am who I am. Go and tell them I am sent you. And Moses was called to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, across the river Jordan and onwards towards the promised land. And as they get to Mount Sinai, God speaks to Moses and he gives him the 10 words, the 10 commandments. Back in January, when Max spoke to us, he did a pop quiz in the service and asked us what the 10 commandments were. I'm not going to repeat that today, okay? But the passage we've got today comes from those 10 commandments, and it focuses on the 4th of those commandments. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. Just get my Bible open again. Remember the Sabbath by keeping it holy. 6 days shall you labour and do your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and all that's in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. 6 days shall you work. See, when the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, they didn't have any rest. They worked every single day. They worked and they worked and they worked. And Pharaoh was a hard taskmaster. He had endless demands for more and more production. And as the Israelites left Egypt behind them, God also wanted them to leave behind that old mindset of relentless working. He wanted them to leave behind their old ways of thinking. He didn't want them to drive themselves into an early grave by continually working. Instead, he wanted them to learn to stop and to rest. When we were talking about Sabbath earlier, what did we say it meant? Somebody said, rest from our usual activities. A time to spend worshipping God, a time for reflection, a day of rest. A gift from God, not rules and regulations. A day to devote thoughts to God, no work but family activities. A day without an agenda, a statement of what we believe. John Mark Comer, in his book, reminds us that Sabbath comes from the Hebrew word Shabbat, which literally means to stop. The Sabbath is simply a day to stop working, to stop wanting, to stop worrying, to stop. But Sabbath is more than just a day. It's also a way of being in the world. It's a spirit of restfulness that comes from abiding, from living in the Father's loving presence all week long. Walter Brueggemann says, people who keep the Sabbath live all 7 days differently. For Jesus, Sabbath, stopping, was woven into the fabric of his weekly routine. It wasn't just a one-day-a-week thing. Then we come to our gospel reading in the book of Mark. One Sabbath, Jesus was walking through the cornfields with his friends, with his disciples, with his apprentices. And as they were walking along, the apprentices began to pick some ears of corn. How many of you, if you've gone for a walk through a field, have done just that? As you're walking past corn or other plants, you just fiddle with them and pick bits. And the Pharisees took exception to this, and they said to Jesus, look what they're doing, they're picking ears of corn. This is unlawful on the Sabbath. You see, once again, the Pharisees were more interested in following the letter of the law than looking at the heart of God behind the practice. Is that sometimes true of us? Are we so worried about following the letter of laws that we forget to follow the heart of God? See, God created the Sabbath to give us a chance to slow down. I'm sure when he said rest, he He didn't imagine the multitude of laws that would be written and would have to be followed. He's not a legalistic God. We don't need to have a legalistic observation of the Sabbath. And in a loving rebuke to the Pharisees, Jesus responds simply, Sabbath was made for man, not man made for Sabbath. So don't beat yourself up if you do need to do things on the Sabbath. What's more important is we actually do take time to rest. Don't fall for the lie that we don't need a Sabbath, that we don't need to rest, because we're reminded in that commandment we had that on 6 days God created the world, but on the 7th day he rested. But I've got a full-time job, I've got lots of commitments. God rested. But I've got children to take care of. I've got shopping to do. God rested. See, God created a pattern for us. He created a rhythm for us to follow. Work, rest. Work, rest. Sabbath is not just a pause that refreshes us. It's a pause that transforms us. And how different would our lives look if we're prepared to slow down every day, not just one day a week? And that was what I've been really challenged when I've been reading John Mark Comer. How would our day-to-day routines be transformed if we lived with a Sabbath mindset? And with a Sabbath mindset, what activities, priorities or attitudes might we need to leave behind? This week, I want you to think about all the activities you do, all the things that occupy your time, all the things that occupy your thoughts. And this Lent, are there any of those things that you can give up? Are there any things that you can leave behind? Because, you know, sometimes we fill our lives with things that may be good things to do and may be really important, but they may not be the right things for us to do. Are there things that you can put aside? During Lent every year I give myself a declutter challenge, taking things out of the house that I don't need anymore and taking them to charity. And every day I have to make sure one thing goes into the charity bag. And I pray for those items for the new homes that they're going to go to. But having read John Mark Comer this year, I've been challenged to do more than that. And actually it's not just been one thing a day. It's been more. Mike's lucky he's survived the cluttering colour so far, but if he's not here with us next week, you'll know he hasn't made it through that week. But I think this week we must have taken 15 or so bags to charity shop. Yet if you walked into my house and looked round my house, I bet you wouldn't notice I've decluttered anything. Because we fill ourselves with things, don't we? We fill our lives with things that we don't actually need. If we have a Sabbath mindset, what do we get rid of? See, if we change our mindset and allow ourselves to have time to rest, time to be, time for God. Last week, Max finished his sermon with 5 minutes. Silence. Practicing silence. This week, we're going to have some silence, but it won't quite be 5 minutes. But I'm going to finish with a prayer. And then following that prayer, I want you to embrace the silence. If your mind wanders, just bring it back. Ask God to show you what he wants you to give up so you can practice Sabbath throughout every day. And this prayer comes from Walter Brueggemann. From the outset you called the world very good. Unlike you, we find the world a dangerous, demanding locus for our lives. We are beset by fears of scarcity and running out. We are visited by fears of falling behind and not measuring up. We are occupied with rumours of war, danger, and terror. We are frantic to protect our little places of well-being. We are weary of achieving and accomplishing. We are exhausted with neighbours who seem to us like competitors and threats. In our anxiety, we find the world at best bearable, but less than very good. You, creator of heaven and earth, you are so unlike us. You do the orderly, proper business of creation, of seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night. You sustain the regularity of seasons, sun, moon, stars and wind, and then you pause in confidence, sure that the world will hold, unworried about scarcity, certain about flourishing, unbothered about the threat of chaos. We imagine you peaceable, cherishing your good world at leisure, not restless, anxious, or worried. We are so unlike you in our anxiety and fatigue. We resolve nevertheless in your presence to be more like you, to imitate you, to fall back into quiet confidence and serenity. Like you, we may trust that your world will hold. Like you, we may enjoy the good order of your creation. Like you, we may be at rest and unanxious. We are so unlike you, and you are so unlike us. And now, in this moment of honesty before you, we promise to replicate your restfulness, finding ourselves able to bask in your reliable goodness, unanxious, unafraid, unbothered, unworried, defined by your durable goodness. Amen.
You have been listening to Bedhampton Church. Our prayer is that this helps you journey with Jesus and serve your community by sharing God's love and friendship. Subscribe and join us for more discussion at www.bedhampton.church. All material Creative Commons copyright. Contact us for more details.